Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along. This is, I think it's 8th week in Oxford University. We don't all think like that, but some of us do. This is the last, for this term, in a series of talks on planetary health. And this week, I'm very pleased that we're touching on a subject that's both dear to my heart and pretty critical in planetary health, which is the interface of planetary health, climate change, food security, food systems, and agriculture, all of those things. And I think you will all know how critical the issue of agriculture is to addressing some of the planetary boundary issues, whether it's the impact of agriculture in terms of its GHG emissions. 20 to 25% of GHG emissions can be held at the door of agricultural systems. The agriculture of the driver of deforestation, agriculture is a primary global user of water. I think we can see agriculture sitting at the heart of a conversation around planetary boundaries. And of course, agriculture sits at the heart of a conversation about our human health and well-being too. There's either too much food and the epidemic of obesity, and the shocking fact that so many millions of people remain hungry. So it seems great to end this term with a conversation about agriculture, but it's not about agriculture, it's about food systems. So let's start again. Food systems, and we're going to be hearing about transforming food systems under a changing climate. Very nice to be able to welcome Ana María Loboguerrero. Ana Maria and I were just finding out that we didn't meet when we were both working on climate change in Colombia a number of years ago, but she joined CCAFS, the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Program of the CGIAR 5 years ago, and is now its Director of Policy, based in Cali at CIAT, one of the CGIAR centres. I think the CCAFS program, which has been running now for somewhere between 7 and 9 years, has been at the heart of a conversation of trying to shift the research system and the way we think about agriculture and food security to a system-wide approach. Now, here at the Oxford Martin School, there's plenty of work on that. We have the Future of Food program and the LEAP, the Livestock, Environment and People program as well. So there's a lot of conversations around technology changes, system changes to address this nexus of issues around agriculture, food security, climate, water, call it what you will. There's lots of entry points to this conversation, I believe. But technology is a key part of it. And as we look at solutions to planetary health, innovation and technology is going to be part of it. And the CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, is one of the almost globally unique, transboundary global systems that's been in place for I believe 50 years now to tackle great challenges of shared human endeavor. And it's had technology and innovation at the heart of its mandate. So it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome you, Ana Maria, and we'll hand over to you. We've got time for 30 minutes or so, and then a good time for questions and answers afterwards. So over to you.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited and happy to be in this wonderful place. This is that mic as well. Okay. So that we get the sound for remote. Okay. So I was saying that I'm so happy to be here in this wonderful place. This is the first time that I'm here at Oxford, and beautiful buildings, very interesting place to work on these topics. So thank you for the invitation, Sam. This is great. And I'm glad that I'm closing this term that you are discussing these planetary health issues. So as Sam said, I'm going to be talking about transforming food systems under a changing climate. And I want to emphasize the importance of the food systems approach and we're talking to some, and we're thinking about changing the name of our program to Climate Change, Agriculture, and Food Systems, because we think that it is important to move towards that food system approach, and you're going to see it through the presentation. The outline. So I'll be focusing on 6 main issues. I want to give you a very short overview about CCAFS, what we do in CCAFS, and why this is relevant for thinking about transforming food systems. Then a little bit of background in terms of why it's important to thinking about transformation in food systems. What we have called a 6-action plan, 6 key elements that are going to help us to think about this process of transforming food systems under a climate change. And then some key areas that we have been calling business unusual, because this is really about thinking about business unusual. So we cannot continue to do things in the same way that we have been doing. Food systems need to transform, need to change, so that we can get closer to achieving these sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement. Some main messages, and I want to emphasize right now that this is work in progress. By no ways we are finishing a phase. We're just, I guess that it's more starting, and we have some key questions that we are currently addressing. So you are going to see that throughout my presentation. I'm going to post a lot of questions, and probably we don't have answers yet. But I think that thinking about the key questions, it's also very relevant in this process. And then some few words about way forward. So a little bit about CCAFS. We collaborate with all 15 centers that are part of the CGIAR around the world, talking different or studying different topics within agricultural systems. This program, Climate Change, Agriculture, and Food Security, is led by the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. And 3 main things that we do in CCAFS: we basically work towards catalyzing positive change, thinking about climate-smart agriculture, climate-smart food systems, and climate-smart landscapes. We are a very outcome-oriented research program. So everything that we do in CCAFS has to end up in an outcome. We need to generate impact. So these are the big outcomes that we want to contribute to. So thinking about reducing poverty, improving food and nutrition security for health, and then improving natural resources systems and ecosystem services. CCAFS is a very interesting program in the sense that even though it is a global research program, we work in 5 different regions. And I'll say that something that is very unique is that our research is very grounded into what's happening in the countries that we work. So we have regional program leaders for all these 5 regions, and these people are really working each day with stakeholders at the national level, at the local level, really embedding themselves in the processes that are happening, and then discovering the main questions, the key questions that we need to address with respect to research with these stakeholders. So it's that our research questions are not coming only from us, but it's coming from these processes of dialogues with these stakeholders. This is the structure of our program. So we have 4 flagship programs. One, it's focusing on priorities and policies for climate-smart agriculture. Second, on climate-smart technologies and practices. The third one is more related to mitigation, but thinking about low emissions development. And the fourth one, that it's more on the climate variability side of things with respect to climate services and safety nets. And then we have 2 cross-cutting learning platforms which are related, one to gender and social inclusion, and the other one which is basically studying how to interact with different partnerships, how to enhance capacity so that we can reach millions and millions of farmers and stakeholders from the agricultural world. So we can reach and bring solutions for them. So we want to believe that we are working, that our strategies are going to change the world. And we work every day towards that goal. So we have different strategies to do that. I'm not going to refer to any of the first 4 ones, but I want to emphasize this last one, which is where our transformation initiative is located. So this is with respect to setting or helping set global agendas. So somehow direct the research, the key questions that I was mentioning, which are those key questions that we need to address. So moving into what specifically I want to talk about today, which is this transformation initiative, transforming food systems under a changing climate. The main objective of this initiative is to build consensus on how global food systems need to transform and how such a transformation can be achieved. And the way that we are doing this is by working together with partners. So we believe that CCAFS is not going to be able to build this consensus, but we believe that CCAFS plus partners can make a difference. So we're putting together a global representative group of scientists and senior technical advisors, including the private sector, because we believe that the private sector has a lot to say in terms of addressing these challenges. And what we are doing right now is preparing a summary report on transforming food systems under a changing climate. And the chair of this group of experts is Achim Steiner, and we have other people that are contributing to this, and the idea is to discuss this report next year, and we are going to have an event where the Danish royal family is going to host a panel to discuss these messages that we want to bring to different audiences. And really, I guess that if I can summarize in one word or few words, what we would like to do with this initiative is to catalyze action. So really interesting research questions, but what we want at the end of the day is that our messages can promote action. Let people start doing things. A little bit of the rationale. So why thinking about transforming global food systems? What is the relationship between this and climate change? And I think that whenever I ask myself this question of why are we involved in this initiative, it goes back to Sustainable Development Goals, it goes back to the Paris Agreement, and it's thinking, is there a chance of addressing this challenge without thinking about transformation, without thinking about changing like in a disruptive way, so really changing the status quo? And always the answer is no. If we don't start thinking about transformation seriously, then we are not going to be able to address these challenges. And right there you can see three, just to put this conversation in context, three of those big challenges that we need to address through transformation. So just think about the approximately 750 million of smallholder farmers that we'll have by 2030, and that we need to reach and work with them, providing the specific technologies so that we can be able to reduce poverty, to enhance food security, and to work towards adaptation to climate change. So that's a lot of people that we need to work with. And we haven't been able to do this in the past. So we need to think differently. We need to think about extension in a different way and probably combine that with digital tools so that we can be more effective in terms of working together with these many smallholder farmers that are the most vulnerable. And then thinking a little bit about mitigation, the side of the emissions of greenhouse gases. Then thinking about the boundaries, thinking about the limits. If we want to be able to limit the increase in temperature to only 2 degrees Celsius, then the agricultural sector needs to do its homework, needs to do its part. And according to our studies, the agricultural sector needs to reduce approximately 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year in 2030 if we want to be able to be in that limit of the 2 degrees Celsius. And yet, what's the bad side of the story? The options or the technologies that we have right now are only going to be able to bring us closer to 21 to 40% of that target. So again, we need new technologies. And technologies, and as I'm going to discuss later, technologies are not the only answer, but it's part of the answer. And the technologies that we will need to make this change to move the needle are not already there. So we need to start thinking seriously about this. And then thinking about food consumption and sustainability. So many experts have said that we need real changes in food consumption patterns. And again, the bad news is that these changes, the magnitude of these changes, we have not seen them in the past. So again, we need to do things differently. We need to think outside the box. And we need to really address this challenge. And transformation, it's a way of start thinking about addressing the challenge. There's a lot of interest among diverse institutions from different sides, and there are a lot of people, institutions are talking about transformation. So again, that's another objective of this initiative, is trying to see where are the gaps, what are the key questions, how can we work with different type of institutions in terms of providing a framework, in terms of catalyzing action, so that we can start changing things. So what's the vision of the food system that we want to achieve through these different actions, through this transformation? So we want to have a world in which all people, including future generations, because that's a key part of this, they are well nourished, they are food secured, and this food security, this nourishment is achieved through transformed food systems. But these transformed food systems are also managing or sustainably managing current and future stresses. And this is climatic and non-climatic stresses. So that's the food systems that we would like to see in the future. How are we going to accomplish these food systems? How are we going to get there? Well, we are emphasizing a lot capacities. So we need to develop capacity so that people that are part of food systems are able to contribute to these kind of food systems that we want to say, and we need to empower people. So capacity plus empowerment is going to help these people to react in a proper way to these climate-related hazards. And also, then thinking about the sustainability of this, so these people are also going to be working towards reducing emissions, capturing emissions. They are going to be working towards sustainable land use and the protection of ecosystems. So that's where we want to get in terms of this food system, these transformed food systems. So, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this diagram, but this is basically emphasizing the importance of thinking in a food system world, thinking about the drivers, thinking about the activities, thinking about actors, and thinking about outcomes. And again, just to emphasize, the outcomes of this process of transformation of food systems is that we're going to be able to get closer to achieving the goals set by the Sustainable World Agenda. So then, and this is something that it's already out there, and I want to take the opportunity to invite all of you to visit this webpage. So this is an info note that we just launched, and this is part of what I'm going to mention in my conversation here. So this is what we have called a 6-part action plan to transform food systems under climate change. And it's part of this is how we communicate things. From CCAFS side, we believe that a huge component of really reaching these outcomes is the way that we are communicating our messages. So if you go into the info note, you will see that we have very cool diagrams that are animated, but again, this is somehow our route, working plan towards to start thinking about how we're going to transform these food systems. So this is part of what you are going to find in that info note. So what we have called our 6 action plan. So 6 key elements that are very important to keep in mind when thinking about this transformation. And I guess that's something important, an important message from here, from this diagram, is that some of these things are already happening, some of these actions are already happening and taking place, but what we are emphasizing is the importance of thinking about this in a systemic way. So it's not just focusing on one of these, but it's thinking about all of them together, and the actions need to happen in all of them. So I'm going to go very fast through these 6 key elements, which we believe that are key for this transformation. So starting in here with the technologies and practices, and again, I want to emphasize that the answer for this transformation is not going to come only from the technology side of things, but it's going to be an important part of this. So we're thinking about climate resilient and low emission practices and technologies. And again, some of these are already happening, and the challenge in here is how to scale them up and out. so that we have many pilot projects where these technologies are being implemented, but how can we reach many more farmers than the ones that we are reaching right now? And then are other technologies that we need to discover, that they are not out there, that they're again in a process of like coming out and seeing, assessing if they're going to be successful or not. But for that, we need to think about effective research and innovating systems. But again, we need to think seriously about this scaling up and out dimension of things. And then moving to these key elements. So we believe that really the digital agriculture, thinking about digitally enabled climate-informed services, it's also going to change a lot the functioning of food systems. So this is thinking about machine learning, big data, ICTs, and again, trying to think different about extension, trying to see how digital agriculture can change the way that we interact with farmers, with smallholder farmers, so that we can do it in a more effective way with less costs. Thinking about early response systems, again, digital agriculture, digital tools, big data, we can make a difference. We can make them more effective. And adaptive safety nets, same story. So trying to include this digital aspect into some traditional way of interacting and responding to these climate impacts. Moving up, so in here, we really believe that this transformation is not going to happen if we don't have a strong farmer and consumer organizations. And there's a lot that we can do in here in terms of promoting local action, in terms of empowering these farmers and these consumers. Most of the times, the answers are right there. So we are working our research in our experiments in our laboratories, and then very often, the responses are there, are in these people, that the farmers, that they go each day into the field, that they understand what's going on. So we really believe that to catalyze action, to catalyze change, these organizations are key at different levels. This element, it's more related to thinking about the food system. So again, I was emphasizing at the beginning that one of the key messages is that these challenges are not going to be addressed if we just keep on working on the production side of things, but we need to think beyond production, and we need to think about all the linkages. So this is thinking about new models of business-to-business coordination, thinking about how diets need to change in order to contribute to this sustainable agenda, thinking about managing food and reducing food loss and waste, thinking about the supply chains, procurement. So the answer, it's also in there. So we need to think beyond only agricultural development. Money, it's also going to be part of this transformation story. And in here, there are many elements that are starting to appear, but in general, what we need is innovative finance. And for instance, public and private partnerships, asking how we can de-risk private finance. So there's a lot of liquidity out there. There's money for these things. We just need to channel the money towards this kind of transformation. Insurance, so thinking deeply about insurance, thinking how insurance, for instance, with digital tools can make a difference in terms of reaching many farmers. So, the financial piece of the story is also really relevant. But then, all of these things that I just mentioned are not going to happen, are not going to take place if we don't think about incentives. So we need policies, we need institutions that can promote these actions. And we need to think about gender equality and capacity development, as I said at the beginning, in terms of promoting this change in behavior. So we have 6 key elements that I just mentioned, and then we have what we have been calling our business unusual. So we have 5 key areas that we believe that we need to think deeper. And even though those, as I mentioned, those 6 key elements and the actions attached to them, some of these things are already happening, we believe that there are some areas where we need to start working right now, and they have the potential to really change how food systems function. And I'm going to go a little bit fast because I know that I don't have much time on each one of these ones. So blue sky technologies, what I was mentioning in terms of really moving the needle, which are those technologies that can really change what is going on? And we believe, and that's what we think that this is a key area, we believe that technological change can really transform agriculture and food systems and can bring many changes, drastic changes in terms of social and cultural systems. So just to give you an example in terms of the penetration of cellular phones, so in 2005, 23% of penetration of these phones in developing countries. Until thinking about 2017, 80% of penetration. So in 2005, it was not easy to think about this huge trend. And this has really changed the way that communications and banking systems are working nowadays. So those technologies, the ones that are going to really change the panorama, the ones that are going to change the fact that we are going to be able to limit global temperature increase to 2 or 1.5 degrees Celsius. And today, most of these assessments with respect to technologies are focusing on incremental changes, not really in this transformation. So I think that this is a key aspect that we need to address. What are we going to do in this paper that we are working on blue sky technologies? Basically, we are considering 3 dimensions of the story. So the food system dimension, so we are classifying these blue sky technologies. We are studying approximately 80 of these technologies. So classifying if this is part of the production, the process, the storage, thinking about the food systems, and then thinking about the stage of development of these technologies. And then looking at the different pathways, so what these technologies can do in terms of reducing the food production demand, or in terms of filling the production gap, or in terms of involving, thinking about avoiding losses in current or future production potential. So these 3 dimensions are being considered in these technologies, and obviously these technologies are related to elements of the food systems, and obviously related to the SDGs that are affected by agriculture. So then what are we doing with these 40 technologies that we are assessing, that we are studying? So we are using a Delphi process to assess qualitatively what are the impacts of this technology on achieving these SDGs, the SDGs that are related to agriculture and food. And then we are using these technologies to create these heat maps. And what we want to assess through these heat maps is that by implementing and developing and deploying massively these blue sky technologies, what are going to be the effects on SDGs? And something which I'm very excited, and I think that it's very relevant for the discussion, is this part. And it's that by this methodology, we are being able to address the different synergies, but also trade-offs between different SDGs. Because I think that that's part of the agenda that we need to think deeply, is how some actions trying to achieve some of the targets of some SDGs are going in the opposite way towards achieving some goals from other SDGs. And this conceptual framework, this exercise, is helping us to understand what are the synergies and what are the trade-offs among the many SDGs. So that's with respect to the blue sky technologies. Then something that is very relevant is that this transformation is not going to be the same for all the countries, for all the regions, for all types of farmers. And farmers are very different. So in here, we want to emphasize the importance of thinking about differentiated development and adaptation pathways. So again, very important, the current situation is that the food systems, the way that are functioning right now, they are not going to be able to achieve food security, to achieve adaptation, to achieve the reduction of greenhouse gases. So we need systemic shifts. And these shifts, again, need to be differentiated. So it's not one size fits all, and this is very important to emphasize. There are different drivers, and there are different solutions. And that's what we are trying to address in these differentiated adaptation and development pathways. So what are we doing in here? We are starting to work with the World Economic Forum future scenarios. So remember that in the World Economic Forum, what they did is that they considered 2 dimensions of the story: the global integration and the environmental awareness. But then we expanded on those pathways or development pathways, and then we said that we really believe that it's important to think about two types of farmers, the market-oriented producers and the subsistence-oriented producers. Of course, what we would like to understand is how, through these development and adaptation pathways, we can get to more resilient and more adapted farmers or systems to climate change, and at the same time contributing to fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So we have two transformation pathways under each one of the 4 World Economic Forum scenarios, total 8 pathways. And what are the key questions that we want to discuss with these different 8 pathways? So we want to address if they are really transformative. So what's happening with these pathways? It's business as usual, it's status quo, what's different? What are the implications in terms of fairness? What are the implications for other systems? And then considering the SDGs. And then something, again, that is very relevant for the discussion, what are the implications for adaptation, mitigation, and development trade-offs? So thinking about the trade-offs story. And what we are coming in here in this paper is coming up with very concrete solutions in terms of thinking about these different development pathways and understanding that they need to be differentiated. So it's not going to be the same story, and we need to consider different type of farmers in terms of this development towards transformation. The third key area that we are discussing in this initiative is with respect to policy. And again, this, we need the enabling environment that is going to make this transformation possible. So in here, we are considering 3 main things: the role of policy, so a lot of discussion in terms of the incentives, in terms of what are the barriers to really get to this transformation, and then in terms of equitable access to resources for different actors. Then the levels of policy, which we believe that are very relevant for the discussion. So thinking about policies from municipal to global level and the interaction among these policies, so this dialogue across scales for the policies. And then interactions in terms of how food systems policy can touch a number of other systems. So this is not only thinking about agricultural policy, this is thinking about trade policy. So we need to touch a lot of other policies that are not only related to agriculture. And again, the thing is with policies, it's 2 sides of the coin. So how are we going to generate the appropriate incentives so that this transformation can happen, but also on the other way, any transformation is going to be disruptive. So things are going to change, and probably there are going to be losers and winners. And then the policy has a very important role in terms of minimizing that gap and not making it larger. So for this discussion, we're also dividing or considering 4 different types of food systems, and we are assessing the key challenges for this type of policies, for these different food systems typologies, the actors that are relevant for these, what are the policies ideas are there, where things in policy are already happening, and again, the key trade-offs and equity inclusion challenges. We, in the policy paper research, we're very keen to consider the financial part of the story, so what policies are needed to shift and give the incentives so that the money can flow to this transformation, and the cross-cutting policy considerations, which are also key. The 4th key area is with respect to finance, and I already said the importance of thinking about how we can promote this change from the financial sector so that they can contribute to this transformation. And the way that the approach for us is trying to engage in a dialogue with this sector, and then trying to understand what are the risks thinking about climate change in agriculture and in food systems. And if we follow a path to transition to a low carbon and resilient global food systems, what is going to happen to the portfolios of these financial companies? So, and again, the way that we are constructing this process is by thinking about scenarios. And I know that here in Oxford, there's a very strong group thinking about the scenarios. And that's the tool that we have used. And we did this workshop like 2 weeks ago. We invited 24 global industry leaders from the public and private sectors. And then again, we use this scenario tool to try to understand and try to come up with innovative solutions on how financiers can foster this transformation of global food systems. So it's trying to understand what is going to happen in 2040 with respect to this transformation, where are the opportunities for the financial sector, and where are the barriers to make this transformation happen. A lot of the questions that are being addressed in this study, in this paper, so who is investing, how green are being the investments. Obviously, we have to differentiate between smallholder financing and agribusinesses. What's the role of public subsidies in all this transformation story? Where are we? And then trying to come up with a roadmap for how to move forward with respect to this innovation in financial issues. And the last one, the last key area that I want to bring to your attention is the one with respect to the role of changing diets in transforming these food systems. And so these are some ideas, key facts that we thought that was interesting, and that's why we include this role of changing diets. So one key message in here is that these changes in diets are not going to come just from the consumer side of things. All part of the food systems need to be part of this. And then also these changes in diets will depend on the political economy at the national and at the global level. So it's not only a consumer kind of thing. And then these are we consider interesting contradictory positions with respect to this role of changing diets. So something that we think that it is very interesting and that we are starting to study further is that usually diets and food waste and these things are understood more from the demand side of the story. That's what has been usually happening. And then the consumer's adoption of new behaviors are most of the time seen from a marketing or education issue, while the farmers and businesses' adoptions are seen more from an economic incentives perspective. And this is really relevant in trying to understand how can we promote this change in dietary patterns. And then the other thing that we thought that was interesting to discuss is how most of the times thinking about malnutrition has been treated as a supply issue, and then thinking about obesity, which is the other side of the coin, is being treated more as a behavioral issue. And I think that these are some, I don't know if you can call it myths, but we need to understand deeper what's behind this. Is this really the way to go in order to make these changes happen? So with respect to this agenda, so that's basically what we are working right now with respect to these changing diets, trying to come up with tools to influence consumers' food environments and dietary choices, but not only from the consumer side, from the demand side, but also trying to assess what's the story with respect to the supply side to really generate these changes. So main messages that we are already exploring, that we think that they are relevant, that we need to start communicating from all these agenda. So context-specific transformative action. So again, this is not one size fits all. This needs to be tailored to geography, to socioeconomic and cultural dynamics, to agroecology. All these are needed, so it's going to be differentiated. And then obviously thinking about that these shifts need to consider the different type of food systems across the globe. Technologies, 2 dimensions of the technology side of the story. We have appropriate technologies that are working already, and we need to understand how to scale them up and out. But we also need to think about these new technologies that are not there and that we need to promote, to invest in these innovation systems so that we can get there. The enabling environment is going to be key. This is not going to happen if we provide the specific incentives for these changes to happen. Then the role of the public and the private sector in terms of understanding the opportunities for development, for business, for financial issues, and then how they can promote this transformation. It's going to be also very relevant. Strong organizations, empowering local actors along the value chains, making use of the digital area. This is going to help us to promote these changes that we are needing in terms of consumption, in terms of production. And then what I was also mentioning before, any kind of transformation is going to be disruptive. And as a consequence, we'll have winners and losers. And then these trade-offs need to be acknowledged, and we need to understand them better. Finally, these comprehensive actions, we need to do them through a food system perspective. So if we just keep on the agricultural development side of things, we are not going to be able to address this challenge. This is the last one. So very, very few words about way forward. There are a lot of things that we need to start doing and moving beyond. But we believe that there is a huge opportunity in terms of really understanding these interlinkages between the transformation of the food systems and the planetary health. So a lot of the things that you have been discussing in here, we need to understand what are these interlinkages. We need to start working a lot in terms of capacity building so that these messages can be adopted and we can start doing things, and capacity has to do a lot of that. And then engagement efforts, and we need to disseminate these messages. Again, I want to emphasize that CCAFS is not going to be able to move this agenda, and we really believe that if we don't work with partners at different levels, academia, practitioners, policymakers, etc., we are not going to be able to catalyze this action to start moving forward this transformation in food systems. Thank you very much.
Ana María, thank you very much. That was a refreshing change, actually, because I haven't been to a conversation about food recently where the word meat has been excluded. So I'm assuming you're a vegetarian and we can carry on, but you know, there is a sort of big elephant in the room normally in the conversations that we have here around livestock and meat and its impact on not only on diets but on the overall system. And I wonder what the reflections of CCAFS is in relation to your very important sort of last side when you're getting to the supply side issues.
So incentives, I mean, we really believe that part of the story has to come from the incentive side of things. And again, it's not only a demand side issue, and we need to start moving towards thinking about the other factors that can make these behavioral changes. So it's also the supply side of things. So if I go to the supermarket, I buy what it's in there, and part of the decisions that I'm making in terms of what I decide to eat and not to eat are because these are the food, these are the products that are available there in the supermarket. So I think that is starting to understand these interactions between, yes, we need to be conscious, and part of that is being conscious about sustainability issues, about thinking about future generations, but also on the supply side. So, and again, so the supply side, we need to give the incentives to the other side of the story so that they can promote more or less of these specific type of foods. And I think that the discussion it's really similar to the one with respect to nutrition and sugar. So why do we should start eating with less sugar, and what's the relationship between the type of food that is available to the different people? So I think that we in CCAFS believe that it's very much through this incentive side of the story that we can make this change.
Okay, thank you. So we've got time for some questions, and hopefully there's a few hands in the room. We have a microphone at the back. We will start at the back, though, because we often start at the front. So could you just say your name and speak to the microphone so that those listening online can hear us, please? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Emmanuel, and I'm on the ECM program. I want to know how the program is kind of incorporating developing countries into, with the concept of transforming food systems in the face of the changing climate. I'd like to know how the program is kind of incorporating developing countries into this transformation, because most of these people seem to be at the mercy of changes in climate change. But most of these policies seems to be Eurocentric and kind of take out these people. So I want to know how they're kind of incorporating the developing countries into this transformational agenda, and how, what has been achieved so far, whether something has been done to kind of bring them on board.
Developing countries.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So that's very important, and so CCAFS is very focused on developing countries. If you saw my slide when I was mentioning the countries that CCAFS is working on, so we work with the developing world. This transformation agenda, it's a global, so it's how to transform global food systems. So it's not only focusing on the developing world, because we believe that the developed world has a lot to say on that, but it's still considering the developing world, and because most of the big issues in terms of vulnerability to climate variability and change are in these countries. And this is why one of those areas that we said we need to address this is thinking about these differentiated development and adaptation pathways. And there's where we are considering a lot of this issue in terms of the smallholder farmers, in terms of, for instance, indigenous people working on farming, in terms of traditional knowledge and incorporating this, in terms of empowering this local action. So I think that a lot of the emphasis is saying that we need to be very context specific in terms of how this transformation is going to happen, and the incentives again need to be different.
Push a bit harder, because I think this is important.
Yeah, but then thank you for the response, though. But some of these adaptation strategies have been implemented in most of these countries. I'm coming from Ghana, and we have different adaptation strategies to the changing in climate, but they seem not to be working. And everything that they do seem not to be working. But then you come to the developed world and they are moving from adaptation strategies to mitigation strategies. So that seems to be kind of helping them to transform their food system. But that seems not to be the case for these developing countries. And we keep talking about adaptation strategies, which are obviously not working. So if you're bringing them aboard, are you trying to look at it from a different angle, or we are still considering the old adaptation strategies that we are used to, which are obviously not working and still impoverishing some of these countries?
If I can just sort of add to that, I mean, I think it's a very reasonable question, really, because there's a lot of emphasis on adaptation, and it's quite easy to talk about transforming systems sitting in Oxford. But in the partner countries, and you showed them on the map, Ana Maria, can we have this conversation about transforming food systems? I mean, we can have it on our own, but clearly, do policymakers and others want to have that conversation, and what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think that this is a key question, and again, I want to emphasize the importance of thinking about differentiated development and adaptation pathways. And part of, when I was saying those technologies that are already working, some of them are not working, part of the story is trying to understand why those technologies are not working. And probably we should get away from those technologies if they are not working. And again, so one part of these elements that we are considered that is key for really promoting this transformation is thinking about understanding local needs, empowering consumers, empowering producers, empowering smallholder farmers. A lot of the answers are coming from them. And then what you said in terms of the adaptation mitigation agenda, I think that in some countries with farmers, smallholder farmers, we shouldn't be thinking about mitigation. We need to start understanding what are the trade-offs, or what are the synergies, what are the co-benefits. So adaptation is the entrance, because that's what most of the farmers are feeling right now. If we can understand what are the co-benefits of these adaptation actions in terms of mitigation, then I think that that's a huge step toward thinking about this sustainability and this transformation. But again, I think that the cases are very different, and that's what we need to hear and to understand the local needs and to work with these people towards which are these technologies that are really going to help these farmers. And then again, another issue that I think that it's key to think is, in some places, under some specific circumstances, agriculture is not going to be the answer. And we need to think if probably moving to other kind of sectors is going to be the answer. And I'm not saying that this is always going to be the case, but we need to start thinking about this possibility, and because we want prosperity. We don't want to keep farmers in something that they are never going to reach this prosperity. So those pathways are also part of the story that we need to understand. We need to start the conversation with respect to this.
Halfway down here, the lady and then the gentleman. Let's take two questions.
Thank you so much for your talk. It's very inspiring. My name is Yu Xuan, also from the School of Geography and the Environment. Just a question about the gender equality in your work. So there are a lot of debates about how the gender equality analysis is actually getting in the way about addressing other issues such as race and socioeconomic class, etc. Like basically saying, because you're focused too much on gender equality and it's not actually touching the core of the problem, and it's not fair for the other social justice issues, especially in climate change dialogue. So I just want to ask, what's your take on this? Do you think this is actually the gender equality approach is getting in the way of addressing other social justice problems in this work, or do you think it's not the case? Yeah.
Agroecology.
So is gender equality getting in the way of
getting in the way of addressing other equality issues, such as like race? And for instance, if you're trying to improve the gender balance in mitigation programs, and do you think this is getting in the way about you addressing other equality issues such as race and social economic status?
Okay, that's a good. Let's take the question behind you. Let's take two questions here together.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. I have a question. Well, you talk about the necessity to transform food systems under climate change and the challenges that we're facing today. In this transformation, you make an emphasis on access to technologies and access to capital. However, there is no talk of access to land and access to plant material, for example. And I know that the answers need to be differentiated, but in a model that is supposed to inform our societies globally, I think that those two should be there somewhere. So,
okay, do you want to address this question?
Yeah, so let me start by that one. So that's really key, and that's part of that. If you remember the diagram with the elements, that the way that we are seeing that is that's in the middle, where we need the enabling environment in terms of policies, in terms of institutions, and part of that is land tenure, property rights. I think that if we don't address those issues, we're never going to be able to think about this transformation. And I totally agree with you, and maybe I didn't mention that, but that's one of the key things that needs to change, and especially, I mean, coming from Colombia, for instance, when I used to work for the government in Colombia, we used to discuss all these issues in terms of how are we really going to promote the development of the agricultural sector, and at the end of the day, the conversation ended when we need to really think about land tenure. If we don't solve the land tenure in Colombia, we are never going to be able to do this. And it's a difficult thing, and again, that's something that is coming a lot from the policy side. So those things, the enabling environment, if we don't work with this, then the other elements are going to fall apart, and we are never going to be able. So totally agree with you that those are issues that need to be into account.
So gender equality crowds out dealing with other issues of social inclusion, is that correct?
No. I mean, I don't believe it's correct. And I believe that the conversation at least, it needs to go in terms of really understanding the role of women, the role of youth, the role of indigenous people in this adaptation agenda. So I don't think that the discussion should be, I think that we should focus on how women can promote adaptation, and we have had some really interesting studies in CCAFS where we see that, for instance, in terms of climate information services, women are like the ones that are getting the information are doing more things. So I think that those kind of things are the ones that we really need to emphasize, and the discussion should be in there. And then how can we empower women so they can have more assets, so they can have more voice in these households, and how that they can promote this transformation.
Okay, some questions down here. I want to go to the front next. So this gentleman and then John behind.
Thank you. I'm Preetham Singh. I'm a visiting scholar at the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies. Very interesting, your presentation, synoptic view of the food system. I have just two clarifications to seek. You mentioned in the beginning about non-climatic stresses and climatic stresses. Could you specify what are those non-climatic stresses, and whether they are autonomous from climatic stresses or there are linkages between those? That's one clarification. The other is that you also mentioned about different types of farmers, which is very useful. Are there any estimates of the different types of farmers' contribution to the total global food production? Because effectiveness of any policy will depend upon who contributes to global food production. If it's the subsistence farmers who are substantially contributing to total food production, then the policy needs to be more oriented to that. But if it's more agro-business, big scale, then obviously policy has to be oriented to that. So if there are any estimates of this, that different categories of farmers, though it might be very difficult, but even rough estimates of different types of farmers contributing to the total.
Yeah, I mean, I like that question because I was left puzzled really. If we're transforming a system, we can't just talk about 750 million smallholder farmers. We have to talk about the other farmers and the whole system, and the two are linked. And you know, does the smallholder farmer really exist? And we get into issues like that. But John, why didn't you ask a question, and then I'll come back to you, Ana María.
Ana María, great presentation. Thank you very much indeed. This week, the UN Secretary General has been speaking out about lack of commitment from world leaders on the climate agenda. There's one obvious country that he might be referring to, but many countries are falling short in terms of delivering on their Paris commitments. I think it was a tribute to CCAFS, among many others, that agriculture has been brought on to the global climate change agenda. Your ambition to put food systems transformation onto that agenda, where do you see the low-hanging fruit? What's the trajectory to getting this onto the table of world leaders as an issue, and how would you? What's the takeaway message that we should be telling everybody that we meet? Thank you.
Okay, so 3 questions.
So climatic and non-climatic stressors. So there are some that are not related to climatic things. And here we're talking about trends. So for instance, demographic trends. So these kind of trends that are happening, the things with respect to ecosystem services that are not only related to climate change. So again, so when we're thinking about this vision of our transformed food systems, it's food systems that are reacting not only to climate. Climate is a huge challenge, so we put climate on top of the thing. But then there's a lot of things with relation to poverty that are not only related to climate change. So those kind of things are the ones that we, in our vision of the transformed food systems, that they are able to react to these stressors as well. The second question with respect to
farms,
estimates, and so that's a key question, and again, I emphasize that this is work in progress. So we don't have yet those numbers, but those are the numbers that we need to start developing. And in terms of setting this agenda for transformation, I think that part of that, from our own perspective, was trying to understand what are the gaps. So what kind of information do we don't have now, but we need to collect to really understand those things. And hopefully those will emerge from this process. So not yet. Low-hanging fruits. So in CCAFS, we have been moving a lot towards understanding the innovation in the financial part of things. And we believe that there's a lot of things that we can do in that respect. And that's why we engage in a really deep process of getting together with these companies, understanding what are the risks, what are the incentives, so what needs to happen. So we believe that if we can channel a lot of those resources into this transformational agenda, we can generate a huge change. So we are still trying to understand better what's the point of entrance, but again, I think that's an agenda that we see. And I think investors, there are some successful stories in terms of this. If we can convince more of them, if we can work with them, trying to understanding their risks, I think that we can do in the short term, we can start promoting these changes.
Yeah, and the great thing about the connection to those 2 questions is where's that money going to flow to, which kind of farmers? So I think that's something that CCAFS will be. I'm afraid I'm going to go this side of the room. There were some questions. I can come back here, but you're next.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name's Louis Slade. I'm curious, I want to push you a little bit further on the incentives that you've been talking about. Mm-hmm. You've been speaking a lot about the need for incentives, the need for policies, pushing the financial sector, and that's a huge challenge. And I'm curious about how much progress you have made identifying what incentives need to be changed and how you can actually shift those incentives, because it seems like an enormous systemic structural challenge. And have you made any progress in your stakeholder engagement so far? And does it seem like a realizable objective given how embedded growth incentives are at the moment?
Let's take your question as you were keen to ask it. We'll do 2 questions.
Hi, Jim Woodhill, Associate with the Food Systems Group. Thanks, Anna, really, really good. And maybe just responding to the discussion at the back about Ghana, we were actually in Ghana last week, actually running a similar CCAFS type issue, looking at future of food issues and scenario analysis. And it was amazing how little people are actually sitting around and actually having a discussion about future trends, systems thinking in a participatory way. So fully endorse what you're saying there. But the question I wanted to ask you is, it seems to me that we've just got a massive political fight on our hands. And if I come back to the comment over here, I mean, Malabo Declaration, investment in agriculture, we're still down under 5% or something if you look across Africa. I just saw in the news this morning that Paul Polman, who's been one of the champions of a different way of thinking, has just resigned from Unilever, and one of the comments there was the investors didn't like his sustainable living type agenda. So, you know, how do we tackle this political fight that I think is going to end up having to be behind tackling some of the power imbalances and the issues of getting the incentive structure right?
That's a good question. So how far ahead we are in this process? I mean, this is something that we are starting, and that's why we don't have the numbers yet. So we have things that we are starting to understand and to get in dialogues with different stakeholders. I think that, yes, there are countries that are, that are going in the opposite way, but then we have good examples of commitment from the policy side of things. So we have, for instance, the Global Commission on Adaptation that was launched like 2 months ago. And here is real commitment. So you see Bill Gates being part of this. So I guess that we need to really understand how we can work together with these big leaders that can really help us to change things. And then I think that these are the ones that can make the difference. So yeah, there's a sad side of the story, but then there are positive things happening. And as you mentioned, we have the Coronivia work program. So after how many years that agriculture wasn't even mentioned in the climate change negotiations, that now we have like an open door to start discussing and start including the topic in the climate change negotiations and possibly trying to bring more resources into the discussion. So it's not that, it's not everything is negative. I think that we have some possibilities, and then we need to start really understanding how can we work with these initiatives, how can we get all together around these big leaders that are trying to move the needle and change things, and then
so, I would offer one, is the glass half full or half empty? I think there's an enormous opportunity in shifting subsidies from bads to goods. But of course, how do we do that? Because there's lots of vested interests and lock-in with those subsidies. And 2 weeks ago, Georgina Mace was here, and we were talking about her view of the 25-year environment plan in the UK, and she was positive about it. I thought it was really, we can be quite cynical about what's coming out of the UK government at the moment, but she was positive about that, and that's creating new incentives for upland farmers to change their behaviour, to destock and plant trees, essentially, to provide environmental services. So I thought there was an example of a shift in national policy which could move subsidies. Farm subsidies can provide these planetary health outcomes and enable system change. And I thought, well, good, that's great. Let's believe that some of these planning documents where leaders step forward, drive a plan and shifts the incentives. But that's, this is the key question in my view. We need to shift incentives dramatically. And food pricing will adjust as climate change gets harder, and both the opportunities for profit and getting things wrong and having stranded assets will drive action, I believe, anyway. So we just have to, we shouldn't just wait. We need to be ready to shape the system. Yep. But I think it'll come. Now, we've kind of gone slightly past time. If there are short, burning questions or observations, I'll take 2 or 3, but there's one from the back, and I'll take that and one from here, and we'll stop with that. So two quickies, please.
So in terms of...
can you speak to Mike, please?
Making it focusing on smallholders, I wonder to what extent the process is a process of undoing what sort of the Green Revolution-inspired subsidy structures have damage that they've done in the past, well, in recent history, and maybe whether some of the solutions are to be found in listening to, you know, or tapping into vernacular practices which were a little bit more resilient, or whether that's just being rosy tinted.
Okay, so a swipe at the Green Revolution, that's very fair. This gentleman here.
Thank you, Daniel Scharf. I just wondered if you're looking at the compatibility of large-scale industrial agriculture, particularly arable, and the SDGs.
Yeah, I mean, those two questions go quite nicely together.
So, Green Revolution. I think that the Green Revolution was good in many senses, and it was a point of time where, yes, productivity was increased, but I think that right now we are under many challenges. At that point of time, we need to increase productivity, and we did it, actually. But the bad side of this story is what I think a little bit what is happening right now. So the thinking about land degradations, thinking about ecosystem services. So, and again, here it's the challenge is huge because we still need to, thinking about demographic trends, we need to feed, so more and more people, so 14% increase in food production until 2030 to feed this new demand that we're going to have. So we still need to think about these technologies, but then, and what it's different from when we had the Green Revolution, then we need to understand how are we going to do that in terms of the environment, in terms of the quality of the food that we are producing, so thinking about nutrition. So again, I think that we learn a lot of things from the Green Revolution, and not everything was bad, but we are in a world in where the way that we are right now is that we need to, again, think about how can we increase productivity, but there are other challenges that we need to acknowledge at the same time. And that's why I think that the conversation, and I think that we need to think deeper about how there are like synergies and trade-offs in the SDG agenda. Because it's not as easy as going through each SDG and saying, we are going to achieve these targets through this and this and this. It's harder than that, because some things, and going back into the smallholder agro-businesses, some things where we are promoting, where we are increasing productivity, then probably it's working on the opposite way towards achieving other goals of the SDGs. But our main message from this side of the story, thinking about the Green Revolution, thinking about agribusinesses, smallholder farming systems, is we need to have a comprehensive understanding of the whole SDG agenda, and we need to understand what are the trade-offs, and we need to understand how we're going to minimize these trade-offs.
So does that include the large-scale agro-industrial complexes as well? Is that, or is that another thing?
That includes understanding where. It's not everything is bad, not everything is good. We need to understand where can we just promote. We really, what I'm trying to say is that we need to produce more food. That's also a fact, and we need to increase productivity as well, because we're going to need to feed a growing population, and that's going to happen. But then again, the story is how we're going to find trade-offs in the way that we are doing this, and that's part of the story of the big agribusinesses.
Okay, so in the last week, the UN's Inclusive Wealth Report has been launched, the 2018 Inclusive Wealth Report. That's their third one. Partha Dasgupta was the lead author in that paper, and that shows a continuous increase in global capitals, but obviously a continuous substitution between natural capital and financial and manufactured capital. We see that declining trend of natural capital at a global scale. But we do see some countries where they're accumulating net inclusive. It's called the Inclusive Wealth Report for a good reason. It tries to break away from GDP, kind of use units of measurement. Have a look at it. clearly there's this issue about how close we're getting to kind of overusing natural capital and substituting it with other forms. But it was Giulia Boccoletti, who was here last week, drew attention to a study by Heather Tallis within the Nature Conservancy, which has looked at sustainable intensification and the possibilities of feeding projected populations, global populations of 9 billion or more, on a smaller amount of land. And I think you know, there's lots of possibilities out there, and I refer you to these studies. Ana María, we must stop. Thank you very much for entertaining us and challenging us with the transformation that is necessary. There's obviously huge numbers of questions that you pose in this work, and we look forward to seeing the results. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.